So this is the face of someone who just discovered they had the camera settings wrong the entire time. And by the entire time, I mean for these past two videos, I could have been recording in full screen at this quality, however, I just had the camera settings wrong. Anyway, that's not what this video is about, we're back. So I would like to preface this video by saying part of the theorizing, a major part of the theorizing that's gonna happen in this video isn't originally mine. I'm basing this video and an upcoming video on a theory I saw on the Reddit by a user called Sasuke, whom some of you may know as Apprentice Sasuke or just Sasuke. He put in a lot of work and effort forging a three-part theory regarding Gukim's Hwarang lineage as well as the Incheon pre-generation ties. So I recommend you guys go over to the Reddit and read the theory over there because it's a very good, well put together theory. And I'm also going to link it in the description for easy access. Now, to make things short and sweet, the Incheon arc may very well be based on the pre-generation. There's really no other way of introducing this theory. As Lookism readers, you should all be familiar with the story of Gapyeong Kim and Shingen Yamazaki, especially considering a large margin of this fanbase is laser focused on power scaling, and Gapyeong and Shingen sit at the top of everyone's tier lists, meaning they are some of the most relevant characters in the story. And Gapyeong and Shingen's story, at least from what we know, did end in a showdown between the two, which from what we know resulted in Gapyeong's victory, and whether or not you believe Shingen was jumped is not really relevant to this video. However, due to these two people standing at the top of everyone's tier lists, I do think that a lot of the hype surrounding their showdown actually masks a lot of the narrative behind their whole rivalry, which, as you know, common sense may have a pejorative effect on the story, or at least our impression of it. And I have mentioned this in a couple videos in the past, at least one of my videos mentions this, but as some of you may know, Gapyeong Kim is actually PTJ's manhwa adaptation of a real-life political figure that roamed the South Korean streets in the 1930s to 40s, and this man's name was Kim Do-han, also often referred to as Kim Ji-han at the time, but Kim Do-han seems to be the more common name. The resemblance seems to be pretty clear between Gapyeong Kim and this guy, and that's not because PTJ was alive at the time or anything. It was mainly because Kim Do-han's story was so legendary that it was both documented and actually adapted into several Korean dramas at the time, with one of those Korean dramas being called Rustic Period. Rustic Period is the South Korean drama that PTJ is basically basing the pre-generation arc off of, though with pretty sizable differences and original iterations of course, because Lookism is a manhwa. And Rustic Period is a series that I myself have not watched. It is a 124 episode Korean drama. However, up to my knowledge and Sasuke's knowledge that he provided in this theory, Rustic Period narrates the life of Kim Do-han and his street gang, and basically everything that took place within this gang. Kim Do-han was a well-renowned street fighter that, just like Gapyeong Kim in Lookism, ran his own street gang. However, unlike in Lookism, gangs aren't really ran how you think they would be, especially not in the South Korean 1930s to 40s era. His gang didn't exactly have a name, though it was referred to as the Youth Action Corps later on in the future. However, this was still not the name they really went by formally or officially, and through this street gang, Kim Do-han actually ran one of the 25 districts of Seoul, that being Jongno. So this gang was more commonly referred to as the Jongno or Jongro street gang. As I mentioned, this was the character Gapyeong Kim was based off of, and so therefore we could pretty much infer that Gapyeong Kim's fist gang was based on the Jongno street gang, though we can never really be sure of anything because nothing was documented 100%, so even PTJ doesn't know everything about Kim Do-han's gang. There are really no sources that exactly document how many members this gang had. However, the common consensus is that it had around 400 to 500. This is if you include the extortionists and all the street gangs at the bottom of the gang, you know, people the Lookism community would have referred to as fathers. And this common consensus is actually derived from what Kim Do-han's story with his gang actually was. Kim Do-han and his gang lived in Korea, again in the Jongno district, and this was in a time period, the 1930s to 40s, where the Yakuza was very prevalent. And since I do not know the exact events that took place during this time, and I have not watched Rustic Period, which of course has its own twists and narrative because it is also a Korean drama, it isn't some sort of documentary or anything, I'm just gonna base this off of what's said in this theory by Sasuke as well as some external research done by me. So basically what I'm saying is take everything with a grain of salt. Now, as we all know, Gapyeong Kim's fist gang gathered in the pre-generation to take down a great power, which was later on revealed to be the Yamazaki syndicate. And Kim Do-han's street gang, which we will refer to as the Jongno street gang for the remainder of this video, was a gang that pretty much ran the entire district, and this is a point where we can draw a similarity between Kim Do-han and Jake Kim here. And we're not exactly sure if Gapyeong and his fist gang were like this, but we can only assume that they probably were slightly similar. And this gang at the time, the Jongno street gang, had made it their goal to ensure that the Yakuza couldn't take over South Korea no matter what they did, pretty much protect their district as if their life depended on it, and it did. Now the Yakuza, which as some of you may know is represented by the Yamazaki syndicate in Lookism, pretty much continuously sent an inflow of oppositional forces to the Jongno street gang. However, none of them were able to break through their forces, and said forces were really just a single man, that being Kim Do-han. They were unable to defeat this man no matter what they did, and the theory goes that the Yakuza at one point sent an undefeated fighter proficient at judo to attempt to take down Kim Do-han. However, to nobody's surprise, because Gaprion Kim is based off of this man, that other man stood no chance. And I mean, just a quick look at Rustic Period's synopsis on any search engine, Google or Firefox or whatever you're using, would pretty much give us a confirmation that Kim Do-han had to go through many foes and take down many oppositional forces in order to protect his street or his district, that being the Jongno district. And therefore, the general consensus was that they were heavily outnumbered. Now enough about Kim Do-han and the Rustic Period, let's circle back to Lookism, more specifically the pre-generation. Gaprion Kim and his fist gang gathered to take down a great force. This was later revealed to be the Yamazaki syndicate, and the story goes that Shingen was defeated by Gaprion. Whether he was jumped or not again is not relevant, and that was what put Shingen in his lethargic state, which basically ended the Yamazaki syndicate's reign, at least momentarily. However, if we take a look at what we've seen from the Gaprion Kim's fist gang and the narrative that we've been incrementally given throughout the story, we could pretty much tell that they didn't really get their power from numbers. The fist gang was a group of elite fighters, the best of the best, that being Gaprion Kim, Elite, Tom Lee, Jin Young, Baeko Kwan, you know the deal. Whereas if we take a deeper look at the Yamazaki syndicate, even a look from the inside, as we have been given an arc on these guys, we could tell that even when they had their inner turmoil, they still got their power from their numbers, and that was pretty much how their leader died. Shingen was just pretty much killed by Shintaro and the hundreds if not thousands of men that led the revolution with him. Shingen was an absolute powerhouse, ripping people into shreds, and that isn't even a metaphor. So much so that even his underlings who were a part of the Yamazaki syndicate were scared to look in his direction or even get close to him, you know, walk in his direction, walk in his path. And the reason I'm pointing this out is because it's going to be important for the later part of the theory. And if you'll notice, by going over Gaprion Kim's narrative and pointing out that it was based on a real life story, as well as discussing the rivalry between Gaprion Kim and Shingen, we've been able to draw a common relation between the real life thing and PTJ's adaptation, and that is that both stories revolve around two parties, one being heavily outnumbered and relying on elite fighters, and the latter completely outnumbering the former by a landslide, however not having that many elite fighters at the top. And in both cases, the winner seems to have been Gaprion Kim's fist gang and Kim Do-han's Jongno street gang. A group of heavily outnumbered fighters versus the power of numbers. Does that sound familiar? And that's exactly what this video is about. The heavy resemblance between Incheon's story and the narrative of Gaprion Kim's fist gang. On one hand, you have Speed, led in the pre-generation by Yu Gang-ha, the former true king of Incheon, and including members such as Yu Jae-seon and Jae-gyeon-na, who are currently both the half-assed kings of Incheon. And on the other hand, you have the Dark Crocodile Society led by Pechon-jo, a foreign Chinese man with the goal of taking over South Korea, starting with Incheon. He's accompanied by the likes of Yu Jae-seon and a couple elite fighters, not that elite though, they're just executives. And notice how I only really mentioned one name, that being Yu Jae-seon, and he pretty much currently sits on top of everything directly below Pechon-jo, as the others are too weak to be mentioned. The Dark Crocodile Society has been stated many times to have hundreds if not thousands of elite fighters, and these fighters came solely to support the Dark Crocodile Society's cause and take over Incheon to then swallow the entirety of South Korea. Again, very similar to Gaprion Kim's fist gang and the Yamazaki syndicate, really only being led by one man, and that being Shingen, whose entire appearance, including his face, was just a silhouette to the entire audience because of how much he was above the entire Yamazaki syndicate at the time. And then you have Pechon-jo, who was not only just like Shingen, both hidden from the audience in terms of appearance and life status because we didn't even know he was alive up until he was revealed, but is also hidden from the entirety of the Dark Crocodile Society, presumably because of his sheer prowess. Not only that, but Pechon has also gone out of his own way to compare himself to Shingen himself, not Gaprion but Shingen, mentioning how Shingen failed to take over this country because of his identity. Additionally, similar to Gaprion Kim's fist gang, Gaprion's fist gang in this storyline is represented by Speed, which is another gang that used to have a rat in it. Now this part wasn't exactly mentioned in Sasuke's theory, however I still find it worthy of mentioning regardless. I think it's worthy of note that just like the fist gang had Elite who betrayed everything to become the man on top, Speed actually had Yu Jae-seon who also, just like Elite, betrayed everything to become the man on top and is now pretty much one step away from being the man on top. And also, just like the Yamazaki syndicate had Shintaro, the Dark Crocodile Society appears to have one Ryu, which is a man that is most likely gonna have things his own way by the end of this arc. However, we're just gonna have to wait and witness the downfall of the Dark Crocodile Society to see what happens with this guy. Now, as I mentioned at the start of the video, Sasuke's theory was heavily based around Gu Kim's Hwarang lineage, and this final section of the theory's third part circles back to that entire narrative. And though I don't particularly think this is what's gonna happen, I still think it's worthy of mentioning because there's a final similarity drawn between the Incheon storyline and that of Gaprion and Shingen's here that, in my opinion, clears a lot of confusion. As you all may know, the party currently attempting to take over Incheon goes by the name of the Dark Crocodile Society, a very cryptic and seemingly goofy name with what looks to be not that much reasoning behind it other than maybe PTJ was fucking drunk, I don't know. However, this part of Sasuke's theory states otherwise, and as you all may know, Shingen was a man whom, just like the Yamazaki elite's gun and Shintaro, had a very special trait about his body unique to the man I just mentioned, that being black bone. His bones are so durable that they require such great attack potency that even Gokim's sword was unable to cut Gun during their 1v1. But what does that have to do with, well, anything regarding Incheon? Well, as I just mentioned, the Dark Crocodile Society is led just like the Yamazaki Syndicate, whether it be Shingen or Shintaro, by one man at the top, that being Peichon-jo. And by Peichon-jo's appearance, you could pretty much immediately tell that something is up with this guy, and he isn't exactly an ordinary human by any means, and that is in regards to his skin, which is very heavily resemblant of crocodile scales. Hence the name, the Dark Crocodile Society. I think you could probably see where this is going from now, but dark potentially signifying how they run their business in front of their victims like it's some sort of normal ameliorative scheme. However, in the darkness they hide their ill intent to take over Incheon and the entire country. And crocodile mostly signifying the man at the top being Peichon-jo and his crocodile scale skin. A man who, just like Shingen and Shintaro, has a very unique trait to his body, that being, just like Blackbone, crocodile scale skin. Now if you guys weren't aware, crocodile scales are supposed to be so durable that even some bullets cannot pierce through. Another similarity that we could draw from this, assuming crocodile is referring to Peichon, is the hierarchical system shared between the Yamazaki and the Dark Society, where the man at the top is usually represented by an animal or some sort of figure similar to that, with Shingen of course being the tiger ghost and Peichon being the dark crocodile. The rest of Sasuke's theory is mainly included in the first and second part, which as I mentioned revolve a lot more around Gokim and his Hwarang lineage. Therefore, I will not be going over that in this video. However, I will be discussing the first and second part of this theory in a future video upcoming, so if you're interested then be sure to stay tuned for that, and again, check out Sasuke's theory, I'm gonna have it linked in the description. If you enjoyed this video then be sure to let me know in the comments, and if you have any original information or iterations you'd like to add then also be sure to let me know in the comments because I do read those. For now though, that's gonna be it for me.